Hello, this is Dale and welcome to another episode of What You Need to Know About Home Studios for Social Media. Now in this episode we're going to talk about the pesky problems of ambient and echo. Now ambient and echo are two different problems, but they both affect the quality of your sound. Now here we are in Studio K, the kitchen, the multi-purpose room, and it's more than just multi-purpose, it's a large room. It opens to the kitchen and the dining room is off of it. We also have a hallway that can affect the sound, and the living room as well. So it's a fairly large room, and it's not too difficult to get an echo in a room this size. It's 20 or so feet or so. So if your home studio is in your man cave, a converted garage or something like that, you may have a little bit of a problem with it. Now if you have a small room, like for doing audio, an audio only, it may not be that big of a problem. Now when we talk about ambient noise, that's the noise outside of the space that you're recording from, not necessarily outside the room or the building or whatever, but you still may get some noise that comes in. There's a couple of different ways you can do this and treat this in a way that will abate this without spending a ton of money. Now the first thing I would say is, normally the term studio refers to the overall encompassing package of jobs that have to be done, such as engineering and production, as well as the voicing, the on-air. And one of the great ways to do it is to have a booth to basically duplicate a booth. Now the way we would normally duplicate a booth is usually a small closet, which is very confined. Now where we get echo from is very simple. Sound moves at approximately 1200 feet per second, and the bigger space that you have, the greater the time when you speak, and for the most part it's coming out in front of your mouth because that's where the noise is, right? Well, if you have a large room, that sound can travel both to your microphone and away, and double that distance come back to the microphone with a slight delay, and it gets recorded into your sound. That gives you that slight aberrant feeling or that dissonance that comes in from it, and that's not unusual. So there's different ways we can treat that. The ambient noise, or the outside noises, are the noises you don't want to have. So if you have something like Studio O, the office in there, it's a 10 by 10 or 12 by 12. I haven't measured it in probably 16 years. It's a fairly large room, and if I back off of the microphone just sufficiently enough, it's a sensitive condenser mic. It will pick up those other sounds. Now one way that you avoid this problem is simply be close proximity to your microphone, to the element, and it will pick that up. Now there are room treatments that soften the edges, and there's a couple different ways that people use. A lot of people use the convoluting foam and will make some sound panels that way, but sound panels can also be fiber. But there's something else that you might do as well if you're in a large room, which is to kind of close that space off, and you can do that. Well, like for instance, do you already have a light stand with the crossbars that you use to hang a backdrop on, whether it be a green screen or something else? But have you considered taking that green screen stand that you would use to hold your green screens up and use it to hold a sound curtain? Now to my left over here, I have a large glass window, and of course it's a little bit noisy because it's a hard surface. You can soften that surface by a number of means. One of the ways is curtains, and blackout curtains are fairly heavy in the back. They keep out a lot of noise, and you may get 30 to 60 dB noise reduction from the other side of that. We use these things in industrial applications and what all. So you have a lot of resources that if you're creative, you can come up with to reduce effective volume of your space that you're recording in. You just don't necessarily want it in your shot. And there's a number of products. Like if we look on Amazon and do the internet search, we can find sound curtains fairly easy. We just need something to hang it from. Now some of these curtains can be kind of heavy, and you need to make sure your backdrop support is capable of handling that. You may also use more than one or a corner. Now we use these in displays in industrial applications and in trade shows. So there are a lot of different sources that are not necessarily studio stuff that you can find out there already made. It's a lot of the same stuff. Small, lightweight stands that have a crossbar from which you can run the rod, the crossbar, through the eyelets and hold a curtain. And actually a heavily convoluted curtain will work better than just a flat surface, because again, it's all about taking the noise, the sound, throwing it out of phase so it kind of cancels itself out. We are dealing with essentially sound waves, which are for the most part sinusoidal, and as we get them in and out of phase at the various frequencies, it dampens the sound out. Now here we'll have a project where I actually used some convoluted foam, and I wanted to take them out of the normal shot because I was using a flag in the back, and the flag was a little tacky, I would admit that, but it was a quick fix for two things. I had an ugly back wall where I had scratched it over the years and I hadn't gotten around to repainting the room, but that soft surface also helps dampen some of the back sounds. Now the front sounds are still the same way. I have a room with some other objects in it which don't necessarily hurt our sound quality. But if you had a large room, such as a she shed or a converted garage, your man shed, or your man room, whatever you want to call it, you may record in that space. And you may get a problem develop as you start to record audio. You might start to hear that noise. Well, if we were to look at the fact how we used to do phones, used to be done in phone booths. Now they were just a small, hard-walled glass kind of box that just kind of mechanically shielded the outside noises. In a radio station, you might find a number of small audio recording booths where they do their commercials and their sound bits. You can't have everyone in studio in the broadcast studio broadcasting, so you might have effectively little cubies, but instead of being open cubies, these are closed cubies that have the little tight space. Now the walls being hard surfaces, they don't necessarily have to treat all of the walls with some sort of soft abatement, but they might if it's necessary for the ambient noise getting into that booth while we have activities in the radio station going on. It's still the same basic process. If we confine that space, the time lag between my mouth and the front wall and the back wall and the side walls and everything bouncing around is about the same, so they naturally cancel each other out. So if you don't have that space, you might have to reduce and effectively reduce the space that you're in and recording audio from, and that you can do with a number of sound curtains and really bring it in. Privacy curtains might help. Anything that's going to help bring that space in is something you might want to consider when you're trying to figure out how to deal with that particular issue. So I have a little project, and I'm going to show you how I built some above my head using convoluted foam, some temporary baffles, and they work fairly well in Studio O, which is a fixed room. This project was born out of discovery, because I discovered as I tried to be both talent and engineer, running the studio, switching scenes and thinking about what's coming up next and the timing, and even being talent, having to think about my guest, responding to them in an intelligent, coherent type of statement, that I could easily forget my microphone discipline. And usually when we talk about microphone discipline, we talk about being a fixed and consistent depth from the microphone, not too loud in voice, not too monotone, and to try to be a little bit interesting. But my mic is a condenser mic. It's my choice. It's fairly sensitive, which is great. It allows me to have a little head turning as I try to operate the console. But the downside is it's sensitive. And if I got too far away from the microphone, being distracted or what have you, that my primary signal, my primary voice, which is from my mouth to that microphone, would weaken, and the background reflected voice comes in there a little stronger, and it would give it that big room sound. Well, my office, my Studio O, is a room in a house, and it has a smooth flat ceiling, 9 feet, and then it has a hardwood floor, lots of hard surfaces. It wasn't so bad because I have 2 windows with some soft fabric sheer in front, which actually help take away some of that reflected energy. But it's also a high ceiling, and I didn't want to put something in my room that would show up in the shot. A lot of people are using these corrugated or shaped foamed, convoluted foam, these little panels, these little pieces, and a lot of people will then stick them directly to the wall. Well, I didn't want to have spray on the wall and overspray that would collect dust. I guess I could spray the foam itself, but it's open cell, fairly open cell, and that's a little difficult. So what could I do that would be removable without destroying my room? I thought back to my days in architecture engineering and how we treated auditoriums, which is a much bigger space with a much bigger problem. And as we talked about sound becoming out of phase, if we can force it out of phase, we can cancel it out so that we can overdrive it with a speaker and have the reflected sounds absorbed by the difference in distances. If you think about some of your commercial spaces, you might have a coffee shop, office spaces. A lot of them nowadays are handling noise reduction similarly. They'll have close to what we would call a cloud. Now, as we would have on walls, these sound panels, which often are of a fixed depth, so that they're not super thin, but they have a fixed depth like a canvas for a painter. They're a little thicker with a covering, a soft covering that will take some energy out. But we also can hang them from a ceiling, and we can mix them in different locations and create different heights between the floor and that upper surface that reflects sound. In coffee shops and businesses, we may see an open ceiling where you can see the structure above, the joist and the corrugated steel decking, and then other parts where we actually have suspended ceiling, so that we have some open space and some non-open space. And all of that is breaking up and presenting different distances for different resonances, and it kind of cancels it out. Well, I have a slideshow for my little project, and this is the way I decided to handle mine. I bought, like so many people did, a type of convoluted foam or corrugated foam, which would have to be stuck to something, and I didn't want to stick it on the walls. So I thought, what could I put it to? Thin veneer plastic is expensive. Thin veneered wood, such as a Luan, was expensive. Pasteboard is fairly cheap, but to find some that are of appropriate size, that was a little harder to do. And eventually what I just decided to do was use a plastic Coroplast style sign material, sign substrate. Because I could buy it, for one thing, I could buy it at 24 by 36. And if I had 12-inch tiles, 12 square tiles, 2 foot by 3 foot would mean I didn't have to do any trimming, and I like that portion. And also, being plastic and weatherproof, they shouldn't be absorbing a lot of moisture, like perhaps, just saying perhaps, that some of the pasteboard product might do. This is the foam that I used. Now, when I bought these, it was because they were about the cheapest I could find on the internet and get delivered at a reasonable price. They're no longer available, and I had to go into Amazon's archives for my account to pull these up because they're no longer available. Now, I don't know if they're no longer available because the seller moved on or they just were shipment or what the deal is, but it may be because of me, because I left a comment, these are not 12 by 12, and you end up having to stretch. And in the process of trying to glue, having a tacky substrate and then trying to put this foam down without catching and tearing it is a little more difficult, but it's not 12 by 12, so it kind of ruined my plan a little bit. As far as being tacky, I started with a 3M headliner adhesive. I used it for spraying labels and many other things. It's a very strong adhesive. I also thought I had enough in the can that was already open. Turned out I didn't. And in the very last shot, I'll show you something that's probably another human error on my part. I went back to the store, and instead of using the very good, very tacky, very expensive headliner spray, I got another all-purpose spray, and I don't think it's quite as strong as the headliner glue. Now here is the way I received the packages. I had 2 packs of 12, I guess it was, to have the 24. Maybe they're 12 and made it 48. Two 24s made the 48. But they came in vacuum packed and highly compressed. If you open the package and let air get to them, they sprung back pretty quickly. Now I was concerned that they weren't the right size. They weren't a full 12 by 12, so I let them sit for about a week to let them acclimate like you would a hardwood floor to the humidity in a home before you put it down. This is a comparison between the unopened package and the packages that is. Now here we have a picture of the substrate, the sign material, as I received it. You can't complain about shipping when it's free, but I did have a little bit of damage on some of the corners. Not that it really mattered a great deal. So before I discovered how difficult it would be to try to lay these non-square, because the length and the width were not the same. Not only were they not 12 inches, but the length and the width were not the same. But I did mark out 6 squares using advanced math of 3 by 2. Okay. Hang them on the wall. I picked a fixed distance and used a screwdriver to simply punch a hole through it so that when I laid out my nails around the ceiling below the crown molding, that I would have them all at relatively the same position. When I discovered just how far out they were on the dry fit, laying out to those squares, I discovered that maybe I would have white edges of the coroplast showing through, so I painted it with some spray paint. Then I glued them down. Now here's something to watch. Despite the fact that I had every intention of laying these out in a perfect pattern, I had one where when I laid the sign material down, I had the hole not away from the wall. So it actually appears to be upside down. And here's the final picture of them in place above my head, out of the frame of the video frame. And you see that little bit of a white line showing through. That's where the adhesive has failed. Now either that was as I was running out of can of the first one, or the second glue was not sufficiently applied to keep it in place. So be aware and give this a try if you're having some of that large room noise in your home office. Now, to close myself out, I'll return. And I just want to thank you for watching and to remind you that I am available on Rumble as Del Hollow Productions and on YouTube as RLDEL149. That's a very old account, and back in those days I had no intentions of ever producing anything for someone other than my immediate friends and family. But I appreciate you watching. Please come back and see me, and never hurts to subscribe on one or more of those channels.